On this episode of Athletic Training Chat, we have Emily Srygler, who is a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and has been doing a lot of work around sports specialization. Emily recently presented free comms about some of the work she has done about collegiate coaches' perspective on sports specialization, and that's ultimately what prompted setting up this podcast. And so we were really excited to talk to her, as sports specialization is always a big topic, one that goes around and definitely comes in waves. But what I thought was super unique about it was their approach to asking collegiate coaches. And ultimately, Emily dives into what they found, what they broke down in all of it, and really some of the takeaways and what more research is going to require in order to get a better answer. So really, really interesting information that she passes on. So we're thankful she was happy to be a part of this episode. As always, we are sponsored by Mueller Sports Medicine. Thank you to them for their support for us and the profession. And also, this episode is brought to you by Wave On Health. It's worth checking out if you are struggling to fill a position, part-time or full, or really just need a better way to help triage some of the patients you see and really get more help without having to necessarily just hire another AT, which is not always as easy as it seems. So check out Wave On Health and see if they have a solution for you. Please enjoy this episode. Welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We are on with Emily Srygler, who is a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and also serves on the WADA Board of Directors with me, which is how we connected. Emily moved into the Southwest Rep, which was the perfect excuse for me not to have to run and feel like I was going to lose out on it as I moved into treasurer role. But just this past April at our state meeting, Emily presented free comms on some of the work she's doing around sports specialization and in particular college coaches' perception of that. And that's ultimately what we're going to talk about today. Obviously, sports specialization is a huge topic, and we're going to have your colleague slash, I don't know how you guys, we're going to have Kevin Byes on talking about it as well at some point. So we'll get another one, but just talking to a couple people that are really digging into this topic. But obviously the coach's perception from the collegiate level, it was of real interest, as you know, many people probably didn't think to ask there before. So before we get into all of that, Emily, I wanted to turn over to you to fill in as much background as you'd like, and then we'll get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joel. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I love talking about this research. I love talking about sports specialization. And I think this is such an important topic for athletic trainers to be discussing. My background is I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2017 with my bachelor's degree in athletic training. So that was back before we had moved to the master's. I then went to the University of Iowa for my master's degree. I got my master's in sport and recreation management there, and I worked as a GA for their men's gymnastics team. So that was awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely a highly specialized sport. So that kind of, was my first introduction into this world, if you will. And then after graduating from Iowa, I moved to North Carolina. I spent a year working in a Duke Health clinic as a physician extender, and specifically as an athletic trainer in their sport concussion clinic. Then I went to Charlotte, where I was an athletic trainer at a private high school and middle school for 2 years. So being in that world of Southern private school, saw a lot of kids playing a lot of sport all year round. And just kind of realized there that there were so many questions that I had that were unanswered in terms of these injuries and overuse injuries, specifically seeing a lot of kids with chronic conditions. And realized that I loved learning, loved teaching, and ultimately came back to Madison to my position I'm in now, which is a PhD student in the Wisconsin Injury and Sport Laboratory under Dr. David Bell, and just doing this research into sports specialization and learning. Still do a little bit of athletic training through UW Recwell as well as UW Health, and love just staying in it and love doing all of these things that help athletic trainers, hopefully. So that's kind of my background.
Awesome. You brought up a little bit about how you got interested in this topic just from your history there. But within the bigger scope of everything through the lab you're working into, what brought about doing this specific research on college coaches' perception?
Yeah. So when I started in Dr. Bell's lab, I kind of knew that quantitative research and math was not necessarily my strong suit.
I feel
Um, it was not what I was loving. So I actually took a qualitative research specialist class, realized that that was like amazing, and then found, through this kind of exploration of sports specialization and discussions on, who is affected, who's impacted, what is this looking like, how is this changing, that we had this sort of blank space where collegiate coaches are. They have so much power in this realm of youth sports by the way that they, have the ability to distribute funds, distribute scholarships, and that has been shown to be a driving cause for specialization. And then they are receiving specialized athletes at the end of it. So they kind of have this very round circular involvement in youth sports, even though it doesn't necessarily touch. And so we kind of thought, let's just do this exploration study. Let's do pure qualitative and just kind of see what are the opinions, what are the thoughts on specialization at this level that is sort of tangential but still very important and influential in the youth sport realm.
One of the questions I had was kind of talking about how it was designed. You mentioned the qualitative. Could you just elaborate, for people that maybe aren't as familiar, because I don't believe, at least in what I've read, maybe a little bit more on the leadership side and some of the working stuff. It's not overly common in the research that athletic trainers get exposed to qualitative, just because so much of the injury related and performance is quantitative. Just what the design was, why that made sense to do it that way versus sending out a survey to try and gather opinions.
Yeah, definitely. So we chose to do a phenomenological approach in this study, which is, I kind of had to learn about a lot, and I've actually just completed a full course on it. But essentially what we're trying to do and why we chose to do it this way is because we have no baseline for this, because this was a gap in literature, because this was not a population that had been studied. We needed to sort of create that baseline. We needed to get just the absolute basics of information. And so the goal of phenomenology, the kind of product that it gives, is an insight into the lived experience of a population of a particular phenomenon. So how are collegiate coaches perceiving youth sports? How does it impact their lived experience of working with athletes and being a coach? Why is it important to them? And through this, we kind of gathered information on, how do they feel about it? Is it even something that they're thinking about? What are their thoughts? And so this was just a methodology that really suited this inquiry because of our lack of knowledge in it. But at the same time, we understand what sports specialization is, and we understand, why collegiate coaches are important in a youth athlete's sort of sphere. So we were able to kind of fit this in and design this study that way.
Appreciate the synopsis of that. I
Yeah.
also, as you were doing it, as I'm working, at some point we'll be working on a dissertation, was looking at grounded theory, but then I was like,
Oh yeah.
maybe phenomenology is the way to go. I might need to call an audible and go that way.
It's a good one. I really appreciate phenomenology. It's a it's a methodology with basis in a lot of philosophy, and if philosophical reading is your thing, it's super interesting. I mean, I love it, but it's certainly helpful in creating a baseline of knowledge.
For sure, which makes complete sense. So
Mhm.
what did you guys ultimately find? Or also, if you want, if you could share
Mhm.
some of the challenges you had
Mhm.
in the process. I thought you did a great job elaborating on that in the short time you had at the free communication session.
Yes. So, I think when I came to my advisor with this, the biggest concern was that as athletic trainers tend to know, this was not a population that was by any means easy to get a hold of. This is not a population that is particularly forthcoming. So that was probably the biggest challenge. The coaches, the participants that were included in the study were incredible and so kind and generous with their time and um very appreciative of all of them. And I think that they were all very open to being a part of research and understanding their role in this kind of uh sphere here, this realm of youth sports. And but even getting a hold of them, there were busy schedules to contend with. There were, you know, potentially things that were maybe not as readily discussed. And so those were kind of the challenges for
Sure.
sure.
What did you guys ultimately find from the study?
Yeah, so our findings were incredibly interesting. Because this was exploratory and because it was qualitative, we didn't necessarily, and we weren't required to go in with any sort of hypothesis. We were just going in trying to get, like I said, this baseline of knowledge. And what we found ended up being, I don't know, I don't know if unexpected is necessarily the right word, but very interesting, certainly. So basically what we found was that coaches believed that youth sports specialization, an athlete participating in only one sport for a high volume earlier in their life, does have impacts on their sport performance as they grow and develop as an athlete. So on one side, coaches were like, well, you specialize and you get good. We kind of ended up calling this sort of like movement mastery, where you specializing in a sport allows you to gain mastery in that sport and allows you to get to the level that you need to participate in college sports. But on the other hand, coaches had a lot of negatives that they perceived about youth sports specialization that were really interesting. So, some of the main ones were coaches felt like even though you developed this movement mastery, even though you got very good at your sport, you still were unable then to develop diversity in your movements. So, a lot of times coaches talked about like, if a kid is running and they're a runner, maybe sports specializing in running allows them to become the best runner that they can be, but then maybe they don't have the ability to adapt to different situations, or they're less able to tweak their running form, or they are moving in this very particular way, one particular way, and that opens them up to then overuse or chronic injury. So that was one thing that coaches talked a lot about versus an athlete that participated in multiple sports has a different ability, has a better ability to adapt movements, to do lots of different movements, and to then avoid or at least have less risk of chronic or overuse injury. So that was a really interesting one. The second one that really came up was burnout. So collegiate coaches did feel that early specialization and high levels of specialization caused athletes to either burn out before getting to the collegiate level, so they were potentially missing out on really great athletes that just
Mhm.
got tired of their sport before college, or that they would then recruit, spend all this time, all this money getting an athlete that would get to college, realize that, like, I achieved my goal, I'm done, and quit. Um, so that was definitely something versus a multi-sport athlete, who has done a lot of different things and then chosen this sport will stick with it longer, like it more, um, things like that. The last one was actually a very novel finding, which was really interesting. And it's something that I'm hoping to look into a little bit more as I move forward into my research. But it was just this idea that collegiate coaches felt like an athlete that had specialized as a child or, was playing one sport at a very high level earlier on had a sort of what we ended up calling a ceiling. So they had already reached their peak performance before college because they had been doing this exclusively. They had been, trained to the level of a collegiate athlete already. So they were the best they were going to be before getting to college, versus a multi sport athlete still has room to grow, room to develop, and room to continue to get better as they specialize in their sport in college. Um, this was, again, just a super interesting finding and something that we hadn't really thought about before, and something that's certainly an interesting perspective on youth sports specialization and kind of a perspective exclusive to collegiate coaches because, I don't know that there's another population that would necessarily think about things in this way.
Yeah, no, that one is really interesting. So it's like, if they're at their ceiling, are they going to contribute with that, or do they need to take it to the next level? And if they don't have that ability, I feel like you see, even like if you think back at like some of the NBA, especially NBA, where they go from like high school to the NBA, and it just never translates. And there's a million factors that go into that, but you kind of wonder if that maybe plays a part of it. Is they just peaked so early at their peak level that yeah, they were dominant, and it just never allowed for the next evolution.
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of what they said is they were like, what if I get this kid and I've recruited them because they're the best in whatever club,
Mm-hmm.
league, and then they get to my team and they're with all the best,
Right.
and there's other the best that can develop further,
Yep.
then that's another thing that can lead to injury, burnout, mental health issues, all kinds of
Yeah.
things.
What were some of the limitations you found, and then where do you see the research going from here, like next steps?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the limitations were, like I kind of spoke about already, just we use semi-structured interviews. So these were set interview questions that I had, but it allows a lot of freedom to dive into something a coach might mention, um, provide clarification, kind of like go on not tangents, but go into these side ideas that might be interesting. Um, sometimes though with time constraints, we perhaps didn't get all of this depth that I would have liked to have gotten with the coaches.
Sure.
So that's definitely a limitation. The other is that we made the decision to not define sports specialization with the set definition um, by the Bell paper in 2021 for our coaches. So we did ask for their personal definition, and all of the coaches were relatively close. They had the key components, but we weren't operating on one set definition in these
Mm-hmm.
discussions. Um, So that might be interesting to look at in the future as well. But I think future research would just be like exploring these opinions and comparing them. So looking at, this included coaches of both sex, athletes of both sex, and Division 1 and Division 2 institutions. So it would be really interesting to compare, to do more of a comparison is like, do coaches of team sports feel a different way than coaches of individual sports?
Yep.
Or, we didn't include some of the much larger team sports like football. So would football perhaps have a much different opinion? And then just looking at these differences, I would love to look at high school or club coaches, so coaches that are working with athletes earlier in their life, and then also potentially like youth coaches and seeing kind of what they're feeling like and how are they setting up kids for success in terms of sports specialization and these kind of concerns in terms of movement and injury patterns.
Be really curious, like if the youth or younger or the high school coaches, the coaches of the younger kids, like knew what the college coaches said, like if that would dramatically change their approach. Like if you count them on like
Exactly.
one and then you like provide them with all this information, like would they rethink their approach to it? Depending on,
Exactly.
if you expanded beyond, that could be really interesting to see if that
Right.
really changes any minds or potentially digs people in further to their opinion on it.
Yes. Yeah,
Also,
100%. I think it'd be interesting to see, like, right, if we, just like you said, like presenting youth coaches with this information, being like, so do do you feel a little differently, or do you feel exactly the same?
right.
I don't know.
So obviously, this being an athletic training podcast and us both being athletic trainers, how
Mhm.
does this? Obviously, it's good information to have. Sports specializations, a lot of stuff that people deal with on the injury front on the back end. How else would you do you make it? Is it relevant to athletic trainers in their clinical practice?
Yes. I think that this is very relevant to athletic trainers. I think another paper done by Dr. Bell was one that found that athletic trainers do perceive that sports specialization increases their workload. So they are seeing overuse and chronic injuries at higher rates because of club sport participation on top of high school participation, on top of summer club participation. And I think that this is just kind of an important sort of banner for athletic trainers to take up. Like, we are here for the athlete, we're here for athlete safety. And we are just finding that not only is specialization something that is negatively impacting youth athlete health, both mentally and physically, but also is something that, people do have negative perceptions of. I think that that was one thing that was really interesting going into the study was that we could have gone to collegiate coaches and said, "What do you feel about sports specialization?" And they could have just been like, "Well, that's how you get good and that's how you get to this level." So, and we were totally prepared for that. And I think the fact that there were these negatives and the fact that collegiate coaches did feel like there were other ways to get to the next level is, something that's incredibly important for this sort of area of research and for athletic trainers to move forward in promoting, even if it's not multiple sport participation, if that's not realistic, then at least modulating or sort of moderating participation in one sport and supplementing with different movements, different activities.
Um, from your experience and then just doing some of this research, what would you or how would you recommend an AT, potentially approaching an athlete or a coach or, even a parent, um, if there's concerns, with injury history, if there seems to be maybe like a trend or something along those lines, any
Mhm.
best practices that you've come across or that you've kind of seen in your work?
So some of the things that coaches brought up that I felt like were really interesting were, even if an athlete isn't doing multiple sports, maybe their passion is really just soccer, and like that's a big argument for specialization. Like sometimes people are like, my kid just wants to play soccer. And it's like, that's awesome. Like you totally want them to do that. But if a kid is continually getting hurt and there's health concerns, I think one of the best things, and I would love to look into this as well, but would be supplementing soccer with something else that's strength and movement based, like yoga, like Tai Chi, like Pilates. Um, I think that those are things that are going to be really helpful in the sports specialization field in the future in terms of further developing athletes, reducing chronic pain, and better fitting in perhaps a youth athlete sports schedule in a way that maybe adding another sport or, trying to fit in another sports schedule might not work for families and athletes.
That makes sense. And I purposely kind of kept this question at the end because I know you didn't give the coaches a definition of sports specialization, so
Yeah.
you're just kind of remimicking the study a little bit. But what is the best current working definition of sports specialization that yourself and the lab has come up with?
Yeah, absolutely. So the current sports specialization definition was created by a Delphi study in 2021 by Dr. Bell and his team. So the full and the definition that we use now based on this study published in 2021 is sports specialization is intentional and focused participation in a sport for a majority of the year that restricts opportunities for similar engagement in other sports and activities. So essentially what it's saying is that sports specialization is not only defined by participation in a sport, but that sports specialization is also, like I mentioned, kind of restricting the athlete from doing other things that might benefit them. Not only other sports, but inclusion of the word activities kind of highlights that, socially athletes might be missing out, or these kind of other things like missing out on opportunities to make money, missing out on opportunities to be involved in community engagement activities, things like that. And that's actually something that our lab is coming out with as well in the future. Uh, it's actually under review right now, which is super exciting, but we are developing the Wisconsin Sports Specialization Questionnaire, which is going to hopefully be able to quantify sports specialization in an athlete, considering all of these other factors, not just sport sport participation level.
Makes sense, and looking forward to that as it comes out. I know
Yes.
lots of exciting work happening there.
Yes.
Anything else around sports specialization in particular, with what we talked about, but also in general that you wanted to cover that we haven't yet?
I think there's a lot about sports specialization that gets talked about. And I think that there's so many different points that can be made, both pro and con.
Yep.
I talked a lot about some of the negative health impacts, but I think that it needs to be said that sport participation for kids is incredibly beneficial. And there are a lot of instances where kids are the ones driving their specialization level just because of their love for the sport, the way that the sport is involved in their identity, um, the way that participation helps them socially, emotionally, all of these things. And I think that the goal of sports specialization is never to restrict children from doing things that they want to do, but is simply to figure out ways and strategies for them to do it in the most healthy and beneficial ways for them, not only now, but in the future as well.
Absolutely. Well, with that, moving into the athletic training chat questions. Where do you
Yes.
see athletic training going in the next 5 to 10 years?
This is something that when I saw this question, I'm so interested in. And, you know, I think that athletic training is going in this way of accessibility. Um, which I think is the coolest part about this profession is I think that athletic trainers, there's a push for athletic trainers in more schools, which allows access to healthcare for kids that might not get it otherwise. I think there's a push for athletic trainers to be able to be seen by broader populations. There's been a misconception for a long time that athletic trainers are for athletes, and I
Yep.
think that that is something that's a really important hurdle for us to sort of get over in the next couple years. Um, and I think just, you know, highlighting that athletic training services are important for everybody. Um, One thing that I do through the University of Wisconsin-Madison's recreation and well-being services is provide athletic training services to students on campus. So any student can make an athletic training appointment to be seen for any pain that they're having, absolutely, without fee. And I think that that's such an important thing for universities to have in allowing their student body to be as healthy as they can.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Definitely didn't
Yeah.
exist when I went to school there,
Yeah.
but it's still pretty cool. Although I'm sure it did. Actually, it did in some form because Dr. Winterstein would go over there and do some things. So it exists. I retract that. It did, just not quite
Yeah.
as robustly as it does now. You guys have done a great job.
Yeah, no, I think it was like a one-person show, a
Yeah,
one-man show, just Dr.
and
Winterstein.
part time. Yeah, on top of
Yes,
everything else that I was doing.
yes.
What advice would you go back and give yourself as a younger athletic trainer? And if you could set when and what part of your career that was in?
Mhm. I think one piece of advice I would give myself, um, and I try and give to anybody looking for athletic training is I think that this career is so much more diverse than it appears at first. And I think that there are ways for people to find a job that works for them within this career, whatever they want.
Yep.
So, one thing I think was when I first started was that I had to accept working any and all hours, and I had to accept, you know, being at the beck and call of coaches and athletes. And I think that one thing I've worked on a lot as I've moved forward and have, you know, kind of talked with myself through and talked with others through is that you are allowed, even as a healthcare worker, to set boundaries and take care of yourself. And I think that that's been life changing for me because I'm much better now at establishing my work life balance and keeping my peace. And then I think in turn, giving better care, doing a better job, and being more proud of the work that I get done.
I like it. What has been the most influential resource you have found in your career?
The most influential resource is definitely just other athletic trainers. Um, this is such a community-based career, and I think that that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I personally love like going to conferences, being a part of the WATA, involving myself with athletic trainers. I'm still relatively new in my career. This is year 7 or 8 of being a certified athletic trainer, and just being around athletic trainers that have been in the field for a long time, being around other athletic trainers that are in different fields, being around other athletic trainers that are newer in the profession as well, I think just gives you such a well-rounded view of what's going on. And also, athletic trainers are the best collaborators. So I think like if I ever have like a patient case that I'm stuck on or a thought I'm working through, like I've never once had and like gone to another fellow athletic trainer and tried to talk about it and had them not be receptive and like ready to brainstorm and,
Right.
work through.
As an AT in your role, how do you take care of yourself?
Yes. So, like I said, I think establishing boundaries, establishing them early is the best way to kind of keep my work-life balance. Um, but other things that I do are kind of like, if I'm really motivated or I'm really in a mood to get things done, then even if that's a night or a weekend, like I'll kind of ride that wave
Sure.
because then if there's a time in the week that I'm really not motivated and not in a place where I'm able to get things done, you know, I've I've gotten out ahead of it a little bit. So I think when you are able, adjusting your schedule is always a good one. And then I think just using the people around you. So, I have my family, I have my husband, I have friends and colleagues, fellow athletic trainers that are so important and sounding boards for me, certainly, and a support system that I always need.
I like it. I
Mhm.
like it. If you could change or eliminate one thing, could be a modality, a common practice, a mindset, anything of your choosing in athletic training, what would it be?
Uh, I think what I would say here would just be this is definitely such an interesting question. And I think that my answer with this would depend on like the setting I'm in.
Sure.
So, one thing about like being a collegiate athletic trainer or when I was getting my GA or my master's degree and I was a GA, that was the hardest was like, I wish that athletes didn't have your phone number. I think that was like the hardest part because it was like, oh, I just worked this full day. Then I get home and it's like, I have an athlete texting me and I'm like, I want to hear from you now. Like I'm home. Um, so I think that that's one thing about collegiate athletic training. I think one thing about high school athletic training, at least in my opinion, was that I wished that I had had it's almost the opposite. I wish that I had had more visibility to parents,
Sure.
than I feel like I had. Some parents were very proactive and sought me out, um, but sometimes they didn't even know who I was when I was running out onto the field trying to treat their child, and, um, I think I'm certain that that's probably better at other schools potentially, but that was something that was really hard was um it wasn't always incredibly clear to parents who I was, what my role was, what they could send me or what they could send their child to me for.
Right.
Um and so I think like parent education would definitely be something about the secondary school that would I would say would be important.
I think that's a good one. Last question. What does being an
Mhm.
athletic trainer mean to you?
Being an athletic trainer means to me that I get to see patients who are motivated and excited about physical activity and exercise and sport. And I get to help them get back to doing that thing that they love or that helps them or that's important to their identity or, they're just passionate about. I think that that's the best part about being an athletic trainer is seeing people do what they love and help them do what they love, whether it's rehabilitation or preventative care or anything in between. Um, Having that knowledge, having that skill set, and being able to work with people is the best part for me.
I like it. Good. Good definition.
Thank you.
Just to wrap up, if people wanted to reach out to you, connect with you, follow what's going on, what would be the best places for them to do so?
Yeah. So I am available on Twitter or X, and my handle is just my name. So at Emily Srygler. I'm available on Instagram at the same handle. And then you can always send me an email. I believe that my email is on the Wisconsin Injury and Sport Laboratory webpage. So yeah, I'm always available to answer emails as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing some of this research and diving into it a little bit deeper and a little longer than 10 minutes. So
Yeah,
always a little
I
easier, I'm
know.
sure, to get it out than doing it in
Definitely
10 minutes.
nice.
So,
Yes.
but appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Joel.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. It truly means a lot for us for you to take the time to do so. Thank you to Emily for being a part of the podcast and sharing some really unique insight, I think, into just an area that makes sense to dive into, but not always something that's initially thought of, who is really paying attention to sports specialization and what does it mean to them, and then how does that impact the rest of us. So thank you again to everybody for that. We will be having a follow-up episode with someone that Emily has been working with more on sports specialization, that one coming up soon. As always, thank you to Mueller for helping us out and supporting this. We truly appreciate it. In addition to all the things, if you ever had an interest in journaling or you're a recent graduate and want just maybe something to help jumpstart your career, some things to think about that you may not be able to come across otherwise until later in your career, that's true for me, and I will speak for Rick in that too. Check out the AT Daily Journal. We have a 14-day free trial at clinicallypress.org/shop, or you can buy the whole thing for $20 for softcover, $30 for hard on Amazon. Just search Athletic Training Daily Journal. We should be up there in the top 5 or so. But thank you again, and we will catch you all next episode.